first pitch today is from a company called Blueprints, and we have David Solomon and we have Kevin Jackson, respectively CEO and head of strategy. Blueprints is a fascinating company. They're aiming to disrupt one of the biggest businesses in the world, economic development. And in that mission, they have coined the term individual collectivism. Perhaps you could tell us something about that, David.
So, individual collectivism is really at the center of Blueprints. And Blueprints is dedicated to delivering economic justice. And so how we achieve this is through assets and products in the developing world. Individual collectivism is something I will touch on, which is essentially a driving force behind how we achieve conscious consumerism, how essentially the products that we're buying will be products where an equitable share is going back to the people in the developing world, where we are seeing embedded in that models which also apply economically, socially, and environmentally.
Thank you, David. David, please give us your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Blueprints is disrupting the world's biggest business, economic development. And for most people, they will ask, well, what does that mean? Essentially, when you look at developing countries, indigenous nations, you see a history of economic injustice where they keep a very small share of the products they produce. And so Blueprints has developed a uniquely scalable model where we achieve investment returns and social good. And the way we're doing this, here we go, is by specifically focusing on what are the best blueprints globally that can be applied to the assets in the developing world to create products that generate cash flow. And this cash flow generates income for the people and it drives forward their economies. So it's not that we're standing here unrealistically and saying we're going to immediately disrupt this giant global business. What we're seeing is a massive trend, and I'm sitting here with our head of communications who's been behind movements such as RED, Drop the Debt, the One campaign, is that consumers are becoming conscious of the products they're buying. They're also becoming aware of the rights of indigenous and developing peoples globally. They're becoming aware of a lot of lies that have been told to us for a very long time. So we all remember 40 years ago when we'd look at the screens and there were strong aid appeals to resolve famine in Africa. And essentially after 40 years, we're still seeing those things continue. So something clearly is broken in the model. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics, you start to understand that for every dollar that goes into developing countries for aid, $24 comes out. Let's quantify that. So for $124 billion that goes into these countries each year, $2.66 trillion comes out. Look at GFI, look at the Norwegian Institute, you'll see it is staggering. So the narrative we've been sold is a lie. So where do you start? How do you deal with this? So what you're going to hear about very clearly is how we are going to create economic justice. How we're doing this specifically with a product. Right now, out in Costa Rica with wood flooring, we're standing here on these wood floors and we're not aware how these floors were sourced. We're not aware if the people who sourced them received an equitable share, if there was slave wages, if the place went through deforestation. We want to change that. We are changing that. So when we arrived, the situation that we encountered was one in which, and I'll get back to the ABC model in a second, but I'm going to give you an example. It was one in which the wood was being stripped from the land and being sent out to Sri Lanka for between $3,000 to $4,000 a container. There was zero consciousness about what was happening. It's leading to deforestation, and the demand is there whether you like it or not. So when you're dealing with climate problems, when you're dealing with these issues, look first at the demand. What we established was we brought in, and this goes back to our ABC model, we brought into the asset a blueprint. Someone with a 20-year track record in delivering value addition to this. And what they did was they kept in the country, they developed hardwood flooring, and they sold this, as you can see here, to a wood flooring company called Western Premium Woods, a division of Richelieu Hardware, a public company, for $46,092. That's over a 10-fold increase. But what was more than this, and this is where it becomes very interesting, is they agreed to 10-to-1 replanting. They agreed to apply the most, and this is where economic, social, environmental, those are those three tiers. They agreed to a 50-50 equitable share, and we'll get to this in a minute. That becomes really, really interesting in how you create regenerative growth. So with this 46,000, people started to prick their ears up in the forestry industry. We had people come out who were running some of the largest funds in wood and the largest suppliers globally who looked and said, you're onto something here. Immediately we got $3.6 million of purchase orders. Now this is really key here, because business, quite simply, is you've got to make more revenues than your costs. That's all business has ever been, really. Now, the beauty of this business model is that the revenues we've shown you are massively increasing. We got $3.6 million of purchase orders. We need your investment to create the processing, strangely enough, not the supply, we have plenty of supply, the processing so that we can brand, market, and ship this product to the demand, which is going into the US, which is going into Canada. And no, we're not just a hardwood flooring company. We're doing this in agriculture, in medicines, in different areas. Now, what's interesting here, the traditional forestry model, and we're doing a sector disruption, is that they will plant the wood and they'll have to wait 10, even up to 25 years before harvesting, creating the product and shipping. We, and this is the key here, and this is where scalability and everything comes in, we are entrusted, we are awarded the assets. We are awarded, so these investors are paying for a 1,000-hectare asset, they're paying $20 to $40 million to come in to an asset that isn't even mature. We're awarded a fully mature asset where we come in, and in Colombia we're dealing with a 480,000-hectare asset. Based on what we're delivering here, that's the trust. Our founder is an indigenous tribal woman, and we set out to establish economic justice. So where are we going with this? Costs. The 50-50 model means that we receive our supply free, based on the fact that we are creating a reinvestment mechanism with the 50%. So now your costs are going to zero, your demand is through the roof, you need investment to increase the product and the quality of the product. So what we're offering our investors, as we're doing this in Costa Rica, is a way, and this is our scalability, we'll get to that another time, is a way to come into the holding company where the £1.7 million £5 being invested, and we're on CrowdCube, we'll have reached 92% of our minimum as of the middle of this week. We just got another 150,000 commitment in. Your investment will allow us to increase supply and production to meet existing demand. It allows us to bring on better 50-50 assets. It will allow us to strengthen a world-class team. And if we get into the technology, it is a multiplier effect like you cannot believe. That is the massive multiplier. But we wanted to talk to you about a hard and fast business that's there, that's earning money, that needs your investment in order to scale. We've mapped this out, and we are told that over a 10-year, at this most conservative, this will generate a 14.33 cash exit multiple and a 46% IRR per annum. We believe this can do a lot better than that because of the products. Well, thank you, and I hope you will join us in building blueprints.
Thank you very much, David. Great presentation. Eddie, you have some questions for David and Kevin.
So David, what I'm not seeing here, I've used Kiva, I've used GoFundMe, I've used various platforms. Just describe for me the experience of somebody coming onto that platform. I assume it's a platform I can log on to. What is different about this?
So we're taking it in two stages, essentially. So the most important stage, so Kiva focuses essentially on microfinancing for small projects. So it addresses an important part of that. And I know some of the founders and investors in that, but it does not address the systemic problem. So we deal with the heads of state. I'm an advisor to heads of state as our partners. We deal at the policy level. We deal with the tribes. We're establishing, first and foremost, a line in the sand, economic justice. We are saying to them that no longer will you accept less than 50% reinvestment on your assets. By example, Norway did this with their resources, and they, with and Kevin here is the head of communications who dealt with Statoil and Equinor and advised them in these areas. They built an over $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund from their resources. Why isn't this happening in the developing world? Okay, so we look at the macro level, but we apply ourselves early on with key areas, what we call an Archimedes lever that can generate cash flow. We're entrusted with multi-billion-dollar assets to develop, the ones that governments should be managing, the ones that economic development funds should be managing, and sovereign wealth funds. But first and foremost, we are showing, and this is our platform is principally asset, blueprint. This is a company, a big company with a track record. The individuals comes at the next stage. The individuals is stage 2. That's the technology. That's peer-to-peer technology. That gets really, really exciting, but we're not there yet. We're launching that in November, and that's part of what we're putting the funds towards as well.
Thank you, David. Kevin, perhaps you could tell us something about your core pillars of your communication strategy.
Well, there's two parts. One, we need to the relationship we've developed with the indigenous people around the world through the Indigenous Business Forum. We were in a meeting in San Francisco where the indigenous leaders who represent 370 million indigenous people around the world who own all of the assets, as David said, adopted Blueprint as the benchmark for future investment. So we were adopted by the community. We spent almost 2 years building up relationships with indigenous leaders and heads of government. And then there's the consumer push as we become more of a crowd-funded organization. One of the reasons we went to a crowdfunding platform was to get to consumers, to get people to understand what is going on in the world. We've got a PR campaign which is starting this week, and we will be communicating directly to consumers.
Fantastic. And David, perhaps you could tell us a bit about your founder.
Thank you. So our founder, Tamara Lakomi, she's a published author, advisor to heads of state, but that's not how her story started. Her father, who recently passed away last week, he trained the armies in a number of countries in North Africa. And they were close to the president at the time. And as things happen in these countries, they were thrown in, they spoke against certain things politically. And the family was cast into the slums. So she had a classical education up until the age of 8, and then was cast into the worst slums possible. And over there, what she experienced was she saw her own friends wake up some days to find their children have their organs removed and be dead on the side of the street. She saw fundamentalism grow. A lot of the attacks that came out of their slums, drug trafficking. And right inside her, a deep, deep vein was cut that she said, I'm going to stand for economic justice so that the things that have happened to me don't happen to other girls like myself. And so really, everything that we do is based on trust. The indigenous people and the developing people trust her, and they trust us because we've gone through that. We know what they've suffered. She's an indigenous Berber Tuareg, so her family history is there.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, David, thank you very much for that. That was David Solomons and Kevin Jackson from Blueprints. You can find out more about the business at CrowdCube.